This Friday, I'm launching my next limited webcast series.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons. I'm kept blindfolded, usually, so that I can't identify anyone. My hands are often tied, but they're not. And I'm not gagged or anything. I'm comfortable. And I had a few scrapes and stuff, but they've washed them up and they're getting okay. And I'm not being starved or beaten or unnecessarily frightened. They're perfectly willing to die for what they're doing, and I want to get out of here, but the only way I'm going to is if we do it their way. And I just hope that you'll do what they say, Dad, and just do it quickly.
I have been fascinated by the story of Patty Hearst and the Symbionese Liberation Army for decades. I read the books, I watched the documentaries, listened to the podcasts, I found trial transcripts and parole hearings, and every retelling of a story that the country has never quite been able to make sense of. The story of the SLA is one of the most fascinating and polarizing stories in American criminal history. A 19-year-old heiress kidnapped at gunpoint from her Berkeley apartment by a fringe group who has declared war on the United States. She spends nearly 2 months locked in a closet while radical propaganda is fed to her around the clock. And she emerges only to announce that she has chosen to stay and fight with the people who took her. Whether that choice was real, coerced, or something we can't quite name is a question that has never been satisfactorily resolved. Not at trial, not in the decades since. This particular story felt like a natural fit as my next series, given the decade I've spent examining the Manson family, the psychology of group dynamics, the sociology of how ordinary people end up inside extraordinary harm. My writing always begins with a question. This time that question was, what radicalizes a person? I asked it because of the SLA and because of Patty and because of other movements that were equally extreme during that era and in the decades since. I wanted to understand how a group of young, educated, idealistic people with futures, with families, with genuine moral seriousness about the world, ended up in a house in Los Angeles that burned to the ground on live television in what remains the largest domestic law enforcement shootout on American soil. I wanted to understand not just what they did, but what produced them. I wanted to know what happens when people feel so powerless that the extreme starts to look like the available answer, or when the extreme finds them before something safer does. These questions felt urgent to me beyond the historical context. I thought when I began that I already had a sense of what had radicalized the members of the SLA. I had read enough, watched enough, absorbed enough of the accepted narrative that I walked into this project with a framework already in mind. The fallacy of that framework, however, became apparent almost immediately. The assumptions I carried into the research did not survive contact with the actual historical record. So I had to pivot, to scrap my original plan and find a more organic, more honest way into this complicated tale. Now, I will warn you, this is the most political I have ever been in this forum. I did that deliberately, not to push you left or right, not to tell you what to think about the moment we're living in now, but because I believe, urgently, that a generation that does not understand what radicalized the past is in danger of replicating it, not from the left nor from the right, from the place that extreme movements have always emerged, the space left behind when legitimate institutions fail people badly enough for long enough that they stop believing anything legitimate is possible. I had to begin this story with what came before the SLA, because without it, the SLA is just a weird true crime footnote. With it, it becomes something that should make every one of us uncomfortable. Not because the Symbionese Liberation Army was right, but because the conditions that produced them did not end in 1974. They did not end with the trials. They did not end with the presidential pardon. They're here, right now, in forms the SLA never lived to see and yet would have recognized immediately. Before there was a Symbionese Liberation Army, there was a country coming apart at the seams, a war fought on lies, a civil rights movement whose victories were real and sincerely insufficient, a federal program that illegally dismantled every organization that tried to build genuine power in the communities that needed it most, a generation that started with faith in democracy and watched that faith get beaten in the streets of Chicago and shot on a college campus in Ohio. This episode is not about the SLA. It is about everything that made the SLA possible and why none of it is as far in the past as we need it to be. The story of the Symbionese Liberation Army didn't begin with a kidnapping or a bank robbery or even a manifesto. It began in a prison visiting room, and the man at the center of it was holding court with a group of young people who hung on his every word. But before there was Q, there was Donald DeFreeze, a petty criminal, a documented police informant with no political ideology, and a compulsive relationship with weapons that had nothing to do with revolution. How he became the Field Marshal General of the SLA is one of the strangest and most troubling questions in this entire story. Q escapes from prison under what can best be described as mysterious circumstances. What he finds on the outside is a world that is already organized, already radicalized, already waiting for exactly the symbol he has decided to become. In this episode, we meet the first people who will become the Symbionese Liberation Army, a gifted law student who rejects her education in favor of the revolution, a Vietnam veteran who signed up for a second tour of combat duty and came home knowing things he could never unknow, a gentle idealist who kept going back to his volunteer work at Vacaville Prison because his conscience demanded it, and a woman who got sober specifically to be useful to the cause. None of them could have built what was coming alone. The Symbionese Liberation Army has a name, a declaration, and a 7-headed cobra as its symbol. It has soldiers who love each other and weapons to train with, and a theory of history so internally coherent that it has already decided who the enemy is before it has met them. Nancy Ling Perry has written the Declaration of War. Patricia Soltysik has built the architecture. Donald Q. DeFreeze has the name and the rank and the absolute certainty. And there are more gathering around them. What the organization does not yet have is a target. That is about to change, and the target they choose will tell you everything you need to know about the difference between a correct diagnosis and a catastrophic prescription. The Symbionese Liberation Army fires its first shot. Marcus Foster, the first black superintendent in Oakland's history, a man who had spent 30 years transforming the schools that nobody else wanted, building coalitions that nobody else could build, doing the slow and unglamorous work that actually changes children's lives. The SLA called him a fascist insect and put a target on his back. What makes this action the most morally devastating, the SLA should have known that their indictment of Foster was based on something untrue. The SLA has killed Marcus Foster. They are waiting behind drawn curtains in a house in the suburbs of the Bay Area, certain that what they have done will change everything. They are about to find out how right they are, just not in the way they expected. What follows will set off a chain of events that none of them anticipated, and none of them will be able to stop. Condemnation, exposure, arrests, a failed attempt to burn the evidence, and an organization scrambling to find the action that will salvage everything. They are reading the newspapers. They are making lists. And somewhere on those lists is a name that will make the Symbionese Liberation Army famous in a way that Marcus Foster's assassination never could. The SLA has spent weeks making lists and reading newspapers, looking for the action that will salvage everything the Foster assassination failed to produce. They need a name. They need a symbol. They need someone whose disappearance will be impossible for the country to look away from. They have found her. This series has deliberately held off on telling her story until episode 7, because to understand what was done to her, you first had to understand the people who did it. She is 19 years old. She's taking art history classes at UC Berkeley. She is engaged to be married, and she has no idea what is coming. Her name is Patricia Campbell Hearst. Patricia Hearst is in the trunk of a car, in her robe with nothing on her feet, her hands bound and a blanket over her head. What happens after the car stops is one of the most documented and most contested psychological transformation stories in American history. A closet with a door that locks from the outside. Voices that become the only sounds she hears for weeks. A demand that will test the bounds of Patricia's wealthy family, the state of California, and the patience of its poorest citizens. The terror of that first night will not last forever. What replaces it, slowly, deliberately, through weeks of isolation and lectures and carefully controlled human contact, is something far more complicated than a kidnapping, an education, or an indoctrination. After 59 days in a closet, Patricia Hearst is offered a choice. Go home or stay and fight. 52 years later, we still don't fully understand that choice or the decisions that followed it. A tape recording, a new name, photographs in a beret with a rifle. Security camera footage of a young woman holding an automatic weapon inside a San Francisco bank, apparently protecting the people who dragged her out of her apartment 2 months before. Is she still Patricia Campbell Hearst? Or has she become Tanya, the revolutionary? And is there even a difference anymore? The country thought it knew the answer as soon as the headlines hit. The Symbionese Liberation Army arrives in Los Angeles with no network, no allies, and no plan. They settle into a poor black neighborhood where 9 armed people, mostly white, cannot stay invisible for long. What follows is a cascade of events set in motion by something as small and stupid as a shoplifting incident, and it ends with more than 200 law enforcement officers 5,000 rounds of ammunition, and a house burning to the ground on live television. The country watches 6 people die, not knowing if Patricia Hearst is among them. When the smoke clears, she will face a version of the same choice she has already made once before, though this time nobody is holding a gun to her head. 6 members of the Symbionese Liberation Army are dead. 3 are on the run. And in a Berkeley park, 400 people gather to mourn the fallen, including a woman who announces, plainly and publicly, that she is a soldier of the SLA. The organization is about to find refuge, new recruits, new money, new safe houses, and a new capacity for violence. Patricia Hearst is still Tanya, or is she, now that the people who built that identity are gone, and the only thing holding it together is the momentum of 19 months she cannot undo. The moment of reckoning arrives in a San Francisco apartment with a federal agent's gun pointed right at her. The SLA is over. The legal reckoning is just beginning. For some it comes quickly. For others it takes decades. New names, new cities, new lives built carefully on top of old ones, until a phone rings or a door opens and the past arrives to collect what it is owed. Patricia Hearst will face a jury, a verdict, a sentence, a commutation, and finally a presidential pardon. And none of it will fully resolve the question the country has been arguing about since the headlines from the bank robbery in April 1974. There is the legal system, and there is the court of public opinion. After 12 episodes, 2 questions still don't have clean answers. What actually happened to Patricia Hearst during her time in captivity with the SLA? And who exactly was Donald DeFreeze? The more you weigh both questions, the more uncertain those answers become. What do we truly know about the movement that produced both Tanya and Sin-Q? And what does it mean for any of us still living inside the same American failures the Symbionese Liberation Army went to war with? The radical left of the early 1970s got almost everything wrong about how to fight. They may not have gotten everything wrong about what they were fighting. Welcome to House on Fire, Patty Hearst, the SLA, and the Seduction of Revolution. 13 episodes released on Wednesdays and Fridays for the next 6 weeks. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this with someone who thinks they already know this story. And I ask you to be willing during this series to be open and to be surprised by the Symbionese Liberation Army, by our shared history, and maybe by yourself.